Welcome to 90 over 90. It's my pleasure to interview Ed Ellington today. Ed was born and raised in eastern Kentucky, Morgan County, on March 6, 1921. He was married to the late Marie Hilton Ellington for over 74 years, and together they raised two children, Perry and Judith. He is the proud grandfather of four and great-grandfather of four. Ed spent most of his life, his working life, in the Ashland, Kentucky area, working for Armco and in the steel mill business, and did that for over 43 years. He is retired now, but not inactive. He's a really busy man. Besides doing our interview, he is involved with Toastmasters. He has a keen interest in cars and just anything in the business world he has an interest in. And Ed, we are so happy that you agreed to be a part of our program, and thank you for being here. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing fine, and I have become an avid reader of the Wall Street Journal, which I find to be not only financially interesting, but historically. And I try to keep in touch with the world outside, because in assisted living, many people have no interest in things other than food and a place to sleep. But I find I labor to keep abreast of things that go on in the world, and this sojourn or this time with the judge just enables me to even more keep in touch with what the world is like out there, in a world that I now have very limited contact. But I'm enjoying this program, and I'm interested in what the outcome will be when this is all finished. And I appreciate a lot the judge and his family for taking time to, the world is not much interested in people once they attain the age of 90, and of course I have gone beyond that, and still able to participate in a limited way in the affairs of the nation.
Oh, well, Ed, thank you. We appreciate that. We, as I told you when we met several weeks ago, we get more out of it than you do, but we're glad to hear that you find some benefit in it, and we hope your family enjoys it, and we hope that there's some value there once you get to see their interview. But let's talk a little bit about growing up in eastern Kentucky in the 1920s. You were, your dad was a steel mill guy, or at least worked in and around them, and so you grew up in that environment. Tell me, what was it like living in, describe the area you grew up in briefly, and also what it was like growing up in Kentucky.
Well, Morgan County, later heard that they didn't have a courthouse or a legal system. They settled their differences out in an open field, and one of them won and the other one ended up dead. But also, as in North Carolina, most of the corn growing in those days went to market in a liquid form. And that later became bourbon, which is still, I understand, much in demand by some people. But I was born, if I had been born in a log house, it would have been considered a luxury. I was born in a board house. It was made of inch-thick boards with a roof out of shingles, and the kitchen in those days was considered an adjunct to the house because that's where the heat was, and they wanted to get it out of the other part of the house. But at the age of 2, my dad left the 50 acres to find work out in industry, and as I have heard, he was living in the city of Ashland, Kentucky, helping to build what became Armco Steel, where I spent my entire working career, and also my other siblings did. And so it was a small town, and my older siblings all ended up without attending high school because there wasn't any high school. They would repeat the 6th or 8th grade many times and ended up being well educated but never having attended a college.
There were 7 brothers and sisters. There are 8 of you total.
Right. And so Ashland, when I attended the high school in Ashland, it was a city of probably 30,000 people, and I was never a great student, but I was active and always interested in nature and the great outdoors. I've never been an athlete or aspired to be, but I have been a person that tries to keep physically fit, and I'm, of course, not really that great at the age of 97, but I'm still trying to be mentally alert, and I'm enjoying Toastmasters and whatever activities I am able to engage. And I think an important phase of my life began after retirement, when I felt called to pastor a small country church.
Well, I want to get to that, but I want to lead up to it first, because I know that's an important part of, and we'll save a few minutes for you to talk about that. But what was your household like? I've been in a household recently with 3 grandchildren for a period of time, and sometimes it can get kind of hectic. What about I can't imagine 8 kids running around in a small. How many bedrooms were in your house? 2?
Well, we had 3 bedrooms, small, and I marvel after visiting the same house, which is still occupied. I have to marvel at how we got along in that house. And there was a time when it was populated with grandchildren and in-laws, and at one point I found a quiet place in the woods that I could go to do my study, because it was no way to study in our house. We were a happy family, but noisy, and we always had decent, clean clothes and enough food. But as far as luxuries, we didn't have them, or most neighbors were in the same state.
So you obviously grew up during the Depression. You were into your teens during that period of time. Did you know that times were hard, or was it just kind of the way it was and the way it always had been?
Well, no, we were aware of conditions, and there was a period when my dad could only pay the interest on the mortgage on the home, and we kids would feel a insecurity where the house might be reclaimed. And of course, we were never near that because the building loan was happy to get the interest, and there was no thought of closure on the mortgage.
Did you get along with your siblings pretty well? You said you were a happy family.
Yeah. We were people who could say anything we felt like saying to each other, but we would defend ourselves for outsiders. And I can remember late in life, two sisters who were widows. One called the other and said, "Let's have lunch." And she said, "I will if I don't get a better offer." So that is illustrative of the kind of relationship we enjoyed.
Well, it sounded like you had to have a sense of humor to get along in the Ellington household. When did you go to work for the steel mill? I mean, when you were a kid?
Well, as I finished high school and at the age of 18, I had no plans to to engage in further education, but I was employed in the labor department of the steel mill, and later, as I felt the need for higher education, I got permission to work part-time and attend a local junior college, which I did until the war came on, and I was then volunteered for service.
Were you excited about being in the Army, or did you feel it was your duty? Tell me what you thought about it. Was it Pearl Harbor that got you to join?
Well, now this you may or may not want to use, but immediately following Pearl Harbor, I was in the freshman year of college, and I enrolled in the Naval Air Corps and intended to make a career with the carrier force, and by reasons of personality perhaps and inability, I didn't qualify for that graduation. So somewhat dejected, I enlisted then in the Army and agreed to do, or always did, whatever I was told to do, and attained the highest rank of Staff Sergeant, and I finished the war intact with no wounds and no medals except a good conduct, which I still believe I have, and they haven't taken it away.
Well, hopefully you can keep it for the remainder. You were sent overseas. I think you spent some time in battle, right, and around battle, and you consider yourself fortunate not to get any wounds from that, but you saw, I guess, a lot of other people that weren't as fortunate.
Now, hold the recording. Do you think a reason for my leaving the Navy is of any interest?
Yes, yeah, you can tell us.
Well, the first thing that happened, I was surprised that the upper classmen had authority, and they assured me that, wait, your time will come. But being a country boy, I wasn't used to being reprimanded by a person who I considered my equal, and I was once told to eat a square meal. And my reply was, well, I always eat a square meal. But a square meal in the Navy meant that you made square motions when you ate it. And I was told to do that, and I've said in repeating, well, I intend to eat a square meal. And they said, well, you're a smart guy, so you report to the upper floor tonight, and I want you to polish 35 white shoes. And I said, look, fella, I polish my shoes, and as far as I'm concerned, you can polish yours. Well, he said, you'll have to report to the captain. And my other hang-up was that I could not master Morse code. My ears just didn't register the difference between a dit and a dot. And the captain said, look, fella, you volunteered into this outfit, and if you are dissatisfied, you are privileged to volunteer out with an honorable discharge. And I said, start writing.
Well, it sounds like you had ended up with a good career in the Army anyway. So
oh, yeah.
It wasn't a bad thing. It just didn't work out for you,
no,
I guess.
No.
Where were you stationed when you were overseas?
Well, I was in the European theater, and primarily in Patton's Third Army. And if you have seen the show on Patton, you will see all the places wherever Patton was, I was. Uh-huh. And I fortunately had life a lot easier than depicted in Patton's show. But we were there, and I was attending the Battle of Bulge and 5 campaigns without any injury. So I felt the Lord had blessed me in that regard.
Then when you came home, and you were not married at that time?
Oh yeah, we were married. We were married in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I was stationed, and we were had a short time together. And then I went overseas for just over 2 years.
Oh, where did you meet Marie?
In college.
You did?
In
okay.
college, uh-huh.
What do you think she saw in you? I wonder what that was.
I was an extremely good talker.
You were? So you think you talked her into it?
Well, from the day I saw her, I told my parents, this is a girl you're going to see more of. Uh-huh. And once she passed as we were parked on the street, and I said, there is the girl I've been telling you about. And so we were then married in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a preacher's home of the denomination which my wife was part of. And he was sick with the flu, and our only witness was his wife and my daughter, who accompanied us, accompanied my wife to Wellington, where they lived in a hotel until we were married, until our wedding. And an interesting thing, our wife, when I had to change to a new fort in readiness to go overseas, I told her to go to the USO and look for a place for a room, and I would return from the distant port when I was allowed to. So on New Year's Eve, I was free to go to where she was, and I asked the USO lady her address, and I went outside, and there was a man there with a car, And I said, how about taking me to this address? He said, well, I'm going to a New Year's Eve party, and if you give me $5, I will take you there. So I said, fine, here it is. That's all I have. And he drove around the block and said, here's where your wife is.
Oh, that sounds like easy money. If you'll hold that thought for a second, I wanted to go back to the Battle of the Bulge. How did that play out, and what do you remember about that? Was it a frightening moment, or were you just doing what they said?
The way life began in that area, my close friend and I received a weekend pass to visit Paris, where we did and stayed in a hotel which had commandeered, which was used by the Army, and we enjoyed a bath and the good food, and we returned home to the base in Luxembourg, and we found that the outfit was loading up to prepare to go into the bulge. And we left immediately by convoy and ended up in a city in Germany called Aachen, and then we participated in the activities of the bulge from then to the end of the war.
Were you ever concerned that the bulge would become more than a bulge and the Germans would break through?
Well, I can recall a time when I would be sleeping on the high mountain and I could hear the German tanks down below us. And I don't know how they didn't know we were there, but I slept through that, and then we participated by living in the barns and in some homes in Belgium and wherever we could find a comfortable place. I was not, I had command of a truck and a driver, and many times I was able to sleep in the back of the truck instead of sleeping on the ground, which was an advantage and a privilege that I enjoyed. But there were times when we would dive out of the truck from strafing German airplanes. My outfit being an anti-aircraft command, we were credited with eliminating 75 German planes.
Wow, it's pretty impressive. You must have gotten really close to those guys.
We did. And,
do you keep in touch with any of them anymore, or any of them around?
The Germans, my appearance then, they wanted to claim me with my blue eyes and blonde hair. They said, "Du bist der Allemand," you know, and but individual German soldiers, I had very limited contact with them. Our opinion of Germans were that they were people programmed to follow orders, and when the superior above them disappeared, they were lost. Whereas American troops, there was always somebody to take over. Mm-hmm. And the Germans seemed to be regimented to the point where they didn't really know what to do unless someone told them. But that may have been more of our opinion than fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's probably depends on the circumstances that you were around, but that's an interesting way to look at it. So you came back to the United States, you made it back all in one piece, which was, I'm sure your parents were glad to see and hear that. And you began your work in the steel mill, and pretty much I think I said originally that you'd had various jobs in the steel mill. I think that'd be a fair statement, wouldn't it? List a few of the things that you did.
Well, the company was wise in that they believed in promotion within. And so in that frame of mind, they had an excellent training program. And for example, I had at one point, they offered me a job as a metallurgist. And I said, well, I'm not really trained in metallurgy. And they said, we'll take care of that. I said, well, will this change of job pay more? And they said, yes, it will. I said, I'll take it. So then I engaged, and they hired college professors to come in and, for example, teach me basic chemistry, which I had not enjoyed at all in my past education. But this fellow knew how to handle us, and I learned some basic chemistry. And then I carried the title of metallurgist and received the pay of a metallurgist, though I had never had academic as such training. And then time goes on, and they said, well, we have an opening for a person to understand porcelain enamel, and we would like for you to take charge of this lab and in the testing that we do on our product. Well, they gave me a lab in which they said, you go ahead and design it, and I had a lab and a helper, and we would test certain quantities of material going out to be used in the appliance business. Then, if there became problems with the customer, they would send me out to try to rectify, and mainly to keep ourselves clear of any fault in that problem, which I spent time in research in the company headquarters to master the idea of enameling process.
Well, you know, a lot of that mentality of promoting from within and staying with one company for many years, that's no longer kind of the way things are done. I do want to reserve a minute or two to talk about Ed, about your retirement. And you mentioned earlier, and I kind of put you on hold for a moment. When you came out, you decided you wanted to be a preacher, which when you told me that to begin with, I really was kind of surprised, because we hadn't really talked about it, and I didn't. You didn't seem like preacher to me. Not that it seemed a certain way, but maybe it was your sense of humor. I don't know. But tell me briefly how that came about.
Well, I was using the word saved, which may be not familiar to some people, but I was saved in my 30s. And our Sunday school teacher was a young attorney, and he moved to another country, and they asked me to take the class. Well, I said, really, this was a kind of what we call liberal organization. And I said, well, I am just a new Christian. And they said, that doesn't matter. We'll give you what you need to use. Well, I was not one to take programmed teaching, and I soon developed a direct Bible study, and I taught directly from the King James Bible for many years until my retirement. And then, watching a legally blind evangelist, I felt called into the ministry, and one early morning I awakened my wife, and I said, the Lord has has called me to the ministry. And she said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I will preach if someone wants me to. And so I got out of the bed and wrote in the Bible the date of my calling so that I would not refuse that call. So that date is still in my well-worn Bible. And then as time goes on, I've found churches calling me to fill in for an absentee preacher or vacationing preacher. And my pastor retired and was filling in. At one point he said, here is a church that needs a pastor. Why don't you be their pastor? And I said, I will if they ask me. So then I did visit with them, and I told this congregation that I will preach for you 10 Sundays and Sunday evenings, and if you believe what I believe, then I will be your pastor. And after that trial period, they said, fine, you can be our pastor. Well, this was an old church that was maybe 100 years old in a rural area, and they had maybe 30 or so members. And so I accepted that calling and stayed with them and was able to experience some growth. And after 5 years, my wife was having to care for her widowed mother, and she had been in charge of the youth and the music, and so I felt that I had to leave, and I went to work, and I found a person that I approved of who would replace me. And so after 5 years, we did leave that congregation and join with a larger church.
Well, I have two more things to ask you. The first one is, I've told you when we started, I want you to tell a joke, and look into the camera and tell a joke, and it can be a George Burns. It can be any kind of joke you want. If you think it's worth telling, I'd like to open our interview somewhere along the line with that joke. And have you got one in mind?
Well,
I hate to ask somebody to tell a joke if I hadn't tell them a whole tell the time, but anyway.
Of course, Baptists are great for, in many cases, beginning a sermon with a joke, and I have many of those, and one that I can easily recall, that a fellow called his pastor and said, old Rex died, my dog, and I would like for you to preach his funeral. And the pastor said, well, I don't know, I've never preached a funeral for an animal. And he said, well, I tell you, old Rex was such a good dog that I would like a proper Baptist message for him, and I plan to donate $100 to the building fund. He said, well, why didn't you tell me Rex was a Baptist?
Okay, that's a good Baptist joke.
Yeah.
$100 will help with that. Second, the last thing I wanted to ask you, Ed, before we finish is, if you could give some advice or leave some words of wisdom to your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and those yet to come, what would you tell them if you could be here to tell them forever and ever?
I would tell them, first of all, that I pray for you daily that you would become a Christian, and then to go through life being a Christian and always trying to be what you are and not trying to be something that you are not. To work hard and be honest, and you will have a good life. And this is my, along with a small estate that I leave, would you keep this in your mind and in your heart throughout your life?
Thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure having you, and enjoyed the stories, and I enjoyed hearing about your life.
She did pass away in February, and I am grieving, and people talk about looking for closure, and closure is the last thing I need, because I want to keep her in my mind and in my heart as long as I live.